Did the late Middle Ages see a revolution in warfare? Well, I know most of you are thinking, well, no sir, I don't think so, because we've done early medieval warfare and you said nothing really changes in the Middle Ages, so it's just going to be knights and stuff and swords and arrows, so I don't think so, sir. Well, those people who say that are in many ways very, very right, because as we know, the feudal system still continued. The king still gave the baron land in return for the barons going to fight for the king. The baron gave the knights land in return for the knights going to fight for the baron, who will go and then fight for the king. And the knights gave the land to the peasantry in order they should feed him. So that system still continued. And on the battlefield, you still had the mounted knight, who was the most important person on the battlefield, like the tank of the age, if you like. And most of the soldiers on the battlefield, they were still, scummy peasants, they were infantry, they were poorly armed, the lucky ones, the richer ones, they had clubs and axes and what have you, but some of them was just anything they could get their hands on, well, pitchforks and sticks and stuff. Armour, probably just a padded tunic maybe. That's going to stop a heavy axe coming at them, isn't it? Some of them could get held onto some breastplates and stuff, but the armour was very poor for the majority of people on the battlefield. Armies were still very small, a few thousand at most, and the warfare was limited. You know, the armies couldn't march very far, they could only fight, in the height of summer in fixed seasons, and quite often, because it was such expensive and dangerous business, armies used to avoid fighting altogether, so there wasn't a lot of warfare happening. And that's not all, you'd also be right. Because the tactics were the same, really, in the late Middle Ages as they were in the early Middle Ages. There was the old trick that William the Conqueror used at the Battle of Hastings, isn't it? The feigned retreat, going, oh no, we're going to run away, or chase after them, only joking, and they turn around and hack them to bits. And that was still being used in the late Middle Ages. Pikes being used, and big long sticks, stop cavalry charges, trying to get people for ransom and just charge their families money. All of that was still the same, and most warfare was just a siege. The army would hide away in a castle, the other army would surround it, and then when they start getting all diseased and hungry, there'd be a bit of negotiations, and the town would surrender. Or, of course, the army would go away if they got diseased and everything. So, you're right, it was the same. And as our aliens here coming surveying the scene in the late Middle Ages, they wouldn't have seen anything different to what they'd seen in the early Middle Ages, really, would they? It's still thousands of blokes in a field, charging at each other with nasty implements, hacking each other to bits. When the sun went down, they'd all go home. So, it looks like there wasn't really a revolution. Or was there? That's right, the longbow. Dun, dun, dun. Now, towards the late Middle Ages, this was being used by many English soldiers, and this was to have a profound effect on the warfare of the age. To draw this longbow, I'm miming now, you needed huge muscles, like these huge muscles, to pull it back and to fire the arrow through the air. Because you needed these huge muscles, that means you needed lots of training. And as we know from the Romans, if you're going to train an army, you need them there all the time. So you need to pay them. So especially in England, you've got these bands of professional soldiers together, also known as mercenaries, who were very, very proficient with the longbow. And this meant that the kings wanted to use these bands of soldiers being able to use the longbow, and so they had to give them money. Where do they get this money from? Well, what they did is they went back to the barons and the knights, and they said, look, I'll tell you what, chaps, instead of you having to come and fight for me in return for the land I've given you in the feudal system, why don't you pay me some money instead? Why don't you pay me some tax, what's called scutage? And so barons and some of the richer knights began to pay the king scutage. So this meant that the king could pay the mercenaries with their huge longbows. And these longbows were devastating. Now, if you imagine the scene, you have a knight on the battlefield. in his chainmail, on his horse. I just get the horse. On his horse, thinking he's the king of the battlefield, as he's always been. Ha! I'm like a tank, if I knew one of those words. Going around, and then suddenly, you know, almost a mile away, sometimes longer, he sees archers. Not a trouble. I'll just charge at them. My armour, my shield will protect. I forgot my shield today. My armour will protect me from their arrows. But these wonderful, strong longbowmen would fire their arrows through the air. And not only would they pass through the armour of the knights, but they were even so strong that they would nail them to their very horses. This meant, for the knights, of course, what was the point? What was the point of being heroic and chivalrous as they'd always been, and training in the art of war, if before they even got to kill anybody, they'd get skewed by an arrow? So this had profound effects, not only on the battlefield, because it meant that the knights were less important, but in society as well, because suddenly the age of chivalry and the knight being a glorious thing, just like in the night film The Knight's Tale, that was all in decline, because they couldn't even get near the enemy to fight them. This all just meant that the archers became more important. They were becoming richer because they were getting money to fight. The more successful they were, the more they could charge. So this group of society is becoming richer. Their status on the battlefield is becoming more important. Because it's more important on the battlefield, it's becoming more important back home in society. And they can afford to buy bigger farms, nicer houses, better clothes. And so this social group is on the up, and they developed this name of the yeomanry, become yeoman farmers, and a new sort of middle social class is beginning to develop. Meanwhile, the poor old knights, not seeing the point of doing chivalry anymore, they're becoming less important on the battlefield. Many of them don't turn up to the battlefield, do they? They just pay their scutage. And this means that they're seen as relatively less important in society. They're also becoming poorer as well, because they're having to pay increased taxes to the king. Clearly, they're still incredibly rich compared to the yeomen, but they're on the decline. And this causes a huge change, not only on the battlefield, but also in society. So, if we go back to our question, did the late Middle Ages see a revolution in warfare?